I'm Trisha Keane, news anchor of KTNV Channel 13 Las Vegas. The following documentary is entitled Balabustas. A balabusta is a Yiddish expression describing a dedicated and dynamic Jewish woman who is a homemaker, a mother, a wife, and a career professional who is also fully committed to her community and the welfare of others. In short, a woman who does it all with passion and conviction. The year is 2005, just prior to the Great Recession. This is a snapshot and time capsule from that moment in history. The devotion of these profiled women exemplifies their bond with Jewish life and ideas, their commitment to community, education, and social justice for everyone. Most evident is their resolute mission to teach their values and traditions to their children and to their children's children.
We came here in 1928, and my mother's name, her maiden name was Leboff, Rebecca Leboff. And my mother came from Russia in the big migration to the United States. In fact, it's really Belarus. And the town that she came from is no longer there. During the Holocaust, the Germans just overran that town. And she came here by herself with a cousin my mother was about 13 or 14 and the cousin was maybe 15 or 16, because my mother was a socialist and her father was afraid of what was going to happen to her being a socialist. My mother was an extremely outspoken person. I mean, she'd just tell it to you like it is. And so she came here, and then she was very active when they were organizing the garment workers. And because she worked in the garment industry when she came here. She went to school at night to learn English, and I think she had about a 4th or 5th grade education. And then she went to work in the garment industry, and eventually she became a designer. When we came here, and because my father worked for the guy that had bootlegger supplies, he didn't make a lot of money. And so my mother started to cook and sew. She would cook for the few Jewish men that were here that wanted a home-cooked Jewish meal. And then she would sew for some of the ladies in Las Vegas. There were no kosher butchers, and naturally, there wasn't any kosher food in Las Vegas. So my mother said the first time she ate non-kosher food, she was sure she was going to die. But she ate it, and she found out she didn't die. And we used to have to drive into... for Passover, we used to drive into San Bernardino to pick up matzahs and stuff like that, because there wasn't any place that you... Eventually they started to bring it in, but in the early days, or sometimes they would have... Somebody was going into Los Angeles, my father would ask them if they could bring us back some matzah. There really wasn't much of an opportunity for the Jewish population. They had the sons and daughters of Israel that you hear them talking about. But what they used to do is that, like, sometimes on the Jewish holidays, they would have a party. Maybe they'd have like a Purim party. The first temple was Las Vegas Jewish Community Center, which became Temple Beth Shalom. That was started in around 1945 or 46. And the way that got started were the Macs, Nate, Louie, and Harry, decided that we would get that. And what they did was they went around to all the Jewish people that they knew and the businessmen, and etc. And he asked for pledges. He said, don't give us the money now, but will you pledge? Everybody pledged. When the building was completed, they called in all the pledges and they burned the mortgage. And that was on Carson, 13th and Carson. It's now a Greek church. We gave the second Torah that was donated to Temple Beth Shalom. We donated that. My mother donated that. When Temple Beth Shalom started, that was the focal point for the Jewish people. Everybody that came to town went to Temple Beth Shalom because that was the name of the game. And we had some pretty prominent people that belonged to Temple Beth Shalom. You know, the Molaskis belonged, the Winds belonged. My father had fought Pancho Villa on the Mexican border. And when he was down there as a young man, there wasn't much to do. So they used to go to fortune tellers. And a fortune teller told him one time, you know, you will make a lot of money in raw land. Not land that has houses on it, just raw land. Well, then my father went to war with the 1st Division in the First World War. And then when he came back and the family moved out here, so he saw all this land. You know what I mean? So he got the man who he worked for and another Jewish attorney, another Jewish man, to go in with him to buy property. And they bought the property out on Las Vegas Boulevard, which is now the MGM, is located there. This is a picture of my father, Alexander Salton, but he was known in Las Vegas as Al Salton, and he had a bar here for about 10 years. It was called Al's Bar, and was across the street, across the alley from the Review-Journal. And I can remember on election night, our folks used to take us down because they flash all the election returns.
About 42 years ago, my dad put my sister and I and the dog in the back seat of our car. My parents were in the front seat. Everything we owned was in a U-Haul hooked up to the back bumper. We drove across country from upstate New York, middle of the summer, and in those days, no air conditioning in the cars. We drove across country because my dad had a letter of introduction to get a job as a waiter in Southern California. So we were leaving upstate New York so that my dad could get a job. We drove across country, miserable trip, as you could imagine. I think my sister and I fought the entire time in the back seat of the car. We got to Hoover Dam, and in those days there were wooden signs that said, come to Las Vegas, it's only 30 minutes away. So since it was the middle of the summer, my dad really didn't have a job that he was going to. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. My sister and I didn't have to be in school because it was the middle of the summer. As far as we knew, the dog had no plans, and we never knew if we'd be coming back east again. So we decided we would stop in Las Vegas for the night. We never left. And I think one of these days we may unpack that U-Haul. That's a joke. We did that a long time ago. The day after we got here, my dad went down to the Culinary Union, and they sent him to the Old Sands Hotel, where he started as a waiter. And of course, by the time the Sands was imploded 33 years later, my dad was not only the longest serving employee at the Sands, he was the maitre d' of the Sands. My mother, the day after we got here, while my dad was going to get a job, my mother knew instinctively that the most important thing to do in a new community was to find the Jewish community so we could establish roots and be with our own. So she went down to Temple Beth Shalom. This is when Beth Shalom was on Okie Boulevard, and she became a member of Beth Shalom. In those days, since there was only one temple, Temple Beth Shalom, everybody's social life revolved around the temple. And as a youngster, of course, I was very active in USY and very active in B'nai B'rith Girls, and eventually I became president of Las Vegas B'nai B'rith Girls. But my entire social life revolved around Temple Beth Shalom. Most Jewish people, I mean, the first thing we do is find that temple and join and become part of the community. And in those days, you know, there was a temple bowling league and sisterhood, and most of the women, most of the moms in those days were stay-at-home moms. So that was the center of their lives as well. I remember going to high holiday services at Temple Beth Shalom. And again, it was the only temple in town in those days, and seeing so many of the celebrities there, because if you were Jewish and you were performing in Vegas, of course you would never perform on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, and there was only one place to go. So you'd never know when you were going to see an Alan King or a Shecky Green or a Sammy Davis. They went to Temple and sat there with the rest of us. The women that worked in the casinos in those days were the showgirls, the cocktail waitresses, the keno runners. So you didn't see too many, if any, women in executive positions. It wasn't until probably the 80s that women became involved in the casino industry, and of course we had a number of trailblazers then. Elaine Wynn is the perfect example. I suspect that she has been a helpmate of her husband Steve's for many, many decades, and is a trusted advisor to him. Other women that perhaps weren't involved in the gaming industry but were certainly pioneers here and role models for me, Barbara Greenspun. Here was a most dignified, elegant woman that was very active with her husband Hank, not only in the newspaper business but other businesses that they were involved in, and very active in the Jewish community. Watching Eileen Brookman operate not only in the political world but at the temple was very impressive. And it was, I would look at Eileen and think, when I get older, that's what I want to do. I want to do community service and public service and still be active in temple. And I think Eileen was certainly a great example to follow for that. When we came to town, as I mentioned initially, it was very important for my mom that we established Jewish roots. She knew, and she was not an educated woman. She had a high school education, got married when she was 20, had me when she was 21. So she wasn't a worldly woman, but she knew that her children needed a Jewish life in this community, and she also wanted something more for her daughters than she had for herself. She had a wonderful life. She would always say that the best years of her life were when my sister and I were young, and she stayed home and took care of us. She didn't work outside the home, but she made sure that we had a good education, that we worked hard, that we made something of ourselves. And that was because my mother willed it for us. My mother's side of the family are Sephardic Jews. They're from Salonika, Greece. And before World War II, half of the population of Salonika were Jewish. 80,000 Jews were in Salonika. After the Nazis finished with us in World War II, there were only 1,000 Jews left in Salonika. I'm not presumptuous enough to think that my family would have been among the 1,000 chosen to live. On my father's side of the family, the Ashkenazi side, from the Russia-Poland border, that not only were there no Jews, there were no towns, a culture that had been a vibrant culture that had existed for hundreds and hundreds of years was literally obliterated in the span of 5 years. If my family hadn't gotten out of Europe when they did, and they had been in Europe for the Holocaust, we would have been exterminated. When my family came here, they had nothing. They couldn't speak English. They had no money. They had very limited skills. They were tailors, of course. The only thing they had was a dream. And that dream was that their children and their children's children would have a better life here in America than they had back home. So I often think of myself as the embodiment of my grandparents' dream, although even in their wildest dreams, they could have never envisioned that they'd have a granddaughter serving in the United States House of Representatives. As a Jew, and knowing our history, and knowing where I came from, not only did I want to give something back to this country, but I wanted to be in a position of power so that if anything would happen again, like happened in World War II, I would be in a position to help stop it. The Jewish community in the United States of America is a beacon of light for Jews across this planet, and it is very important for us. It's our responsibility and our duty to our fellow man, to our fellow Jews, and to future generations of Jews to make sure that we stay strong, we are strong, and we're involved. And that's my message to the Jewish community, and not only in Las Vegas, but throughout the United States.
My mother and father met in the United States. They had both immigrated to this country when they were in their late teens, 16. My father and mother both worked in factories. My mother was, I guess they were called sweatshops at the time. They were on the Lower East Side, and my mother was a seamstress, and they both worked at the shop sewing machines. We later moved to New Jersey, and my father became a cutter in a factory. It was a men's clothing factory, and later he became one of the manufacturers but his partners were all from Poland and Russia, where he was from. He was from Russia. And so most of his life, on a daily basis, he was speaking Slavic languages. At home, when my parents didn't want us to understand what they were talking about, they would speak either Russian or Polish. But to us, they spoke Yiddish. There were 9 children in the family, and 8 of them had come to this country. The oldest one was Zalman. He did not come over first. The oldest sister came over with my grandfather's uncle, and they had to leave the country secretly because they were reacting to the pogroms that started after the failed revolution in Russia. If they were caught at the border, they would have been shot. So they didn't take a risk of coming over more than 2 at a time. Zalman stayed in Russia because he was the oldest son, and he was able to help take care of the rest of the children in the family. So he stayed there. When he finally came to this country, it might have been around 1910. He believed in a form of peaceful anarchism and believed that there were enough good people in the world so that he could appeal to their loving natures and that the world would become a better place. My other uncle, his name was Sam Deanin. He was an associate professor at the Jewish Theological Seminary there. When he came to Los Angeles, he started the United Jewish Bureau. He also developed the University of Judaism. I was invited to have an exhibit at the University of Judaism in Los Angeles. I was befriended and encouraged by Eric Ray, who was a curator at the time. He came to Las Vegas and he told me about the project at Temple Beth Shalom. He was renovating the Bima, and he wanted to know if I could do the screen for the Bima. And since he also knew that I had been experimenting with resins and fiberglass, he thought that that would be a plus, since I could do all the fabrication myself and I wouldn't have to deal with stained glass. The quotation, and I don't remember it, so I wrote down the exact quote. It was from Psalm 104. It was in Hebrew, and it read, "The Lord, my God, thou art very great. Thou art clothed with glory and majesty. Thou coverest thyself with light as with a garment. Thou stretchest out the heavens like a curtain." I never consciously focused on Jewish art. In fact, that's kind of an enigma to me, unless the symbols themselves make the work Jewish. I was much more influenced by nature, my surroundings, my environment, and also by other artists. One of the big differences in my life was meeting my husband, getting married in 1985, and he was he was able to fulfill a lot of my dreams and make things a lot better for us. His name is Robert Beliveau, and we've been married for 20 years now. And he shares my vision about a lot of things about the environment and is very, very encouraging to my art, and participates in a lot of the trips I take to foundries and fabrication plants. I kept envisioning the Star of David, the Mogen David, exploding from the traumatic impact of the genocide. And as a result, the base triangle, there are 2 main triangles in the sculpture, and the base triangle represents stability, a spirit of endurance. The other triangle has been interrupted by a step plane, which to me is the intrusion of the Holocaust. And it hovers balanced on an arm, cantilevered over the whole piece, as if it's waiting to be reunited. These are opportunities for me to study more and to learn more Hebrew and to identify with a heritage that I'm a product of. So that's very important to me.
We came here with 2 infants, 2 little boys. We came here first and foremost, after they interviewed Lee, they needed Lee to head a hospital in radiology, the Sunrise Hospital. He looked at me and said, "Faye, what do you think?" I said, "Well, there's this Jewish synagogue here, and there's a kosher meat market. I could make it." The synagogue women were wonderful. I immediately joined the sisterhood and met some outstanding women that to this day I think about and say how blessed we are to meet people of that high quality, that people that cared for each other, people that cared for Judaism. Among these women was a special little woman called Sarah Salzman, who everybody adored. Shortly after arriving in Las Vegas, I got my wish to have a large family, and I started having child after child, and it was a real blessing. So we're blessed with 5 children. Temple life was very important to me. It was always important to me because as a child, growing up, being born in New York City, coming from a very Orthodox family, I remember so many beautiful things. Every holiday was special. Shabbat in particular, and Pesach. The Pesachs in our home. Nobody had Pesachs like we had Pesach. My father and mother used to invite some of the soldiers that were there in the army camps that didn't have a place to come to join us. My father, may he rest in peace, to go to synagogue and bring home a stranger because that was the thing to do for Shabbos dinner. My whole life changed actually when I met my husband. I never loved anybody like I love him, and I never will. We met, we were 16. I was 16, he was 18. He was a serviceman, and we met at a Jewish community center dance. And when we decided that, actually, he convinced me that I had to marry him. I wasn't sure, I was so scared, but he kept saying, "Don't worry, Faye, it's right. We're right for each other." And we sure are.
Oh, you beautiful doll, you great big beautiful doll. Let me put my arms about you. I could never live without you. Oh, you beautiful doll, you great big beautiful doll. If you ever leave me, how my heart will ache. I want to hug you, but I fear you'd break. Oh, 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 you beautiful doll.
To be philanthropic, you have to have the means to do it, and you have to have the heart to do it. As a young child, when I didn't have any means, but I had the heart, because I used to see what my parents used to do. If my father would make $5, he'd managed to give away 2.5. He found another family that was poorer than us. And my mother sometimes suffered because with 6 kids, you have to worry how to feed those 6 kids. Sometimes she had a problem. But Shabbos would come, we'd always manage to have something on the table, and we'd always manage to have a guest. There are memories that are deep in my heart. The memories of being blessed according to our age. Every Shabbos, every Friday night, we used to line up according to our age, from youngest to oldest, and Dad would bless us. My mother gave me a very special blessing all the time, and her blessing was, God should bless you with everything good, Freidela, because you never said no. Whatever I ever needed, you were there for me. And it was very special to me. I never forgot it. My mother never stopped talking to us children. What she wanted us to do, how she wanted us to conduct our lives, what she expected us to live together as family members. These are the very things I say to my children all the time. I tell them, I want you to be honest with each other, be respectful, be forthright, to be charitable, to be kind, to love people, to have understanding, to reach out and help. The values that I have been given as a child, I hope to pass on to my children. We don't know when we help somebody.
We don't know how we're going to impact somebody's lives, but the important thing is we've got to still keep giving. Because somewhere along the line, somebody's going to say, if it hadn't been for the help I got, I couldn't be where I am. And maybe somewhere along the line, someone is saying, that help was important, and you know that you had a little share in it. What I call a chaylik, which is a share.
We're sitting here in my living room, Gertrude. That's my daughter, Geri Renchler, and her daughter, Dani Ramage, my granddaughter, my other granddaughter, Rosalie Rudiak, and my son, Richard Rudiak.
One of my earliest remembrances actually is Hanukkah. I must have been, I guess, about 3 or 4 years old, and it was in the house on Stewart, and we didn't have a menorah. Mom she had a big brass ashtray. Nobody smoked, but she had an ashtray. And she'd put us to bed at night and then put birthday candles in there, and light them each night. And I can remember watching those candles burn down.
The kids, of course, started school here. I became a member of Sisterhood and at the temple. For a while there, I played the organ for the temple for services, just for a short while, and then afterwards they didn't use the organ anymore. But I organized the senior citizens there. The older people, what I would do is I had a car that held 10 people. It was a Chrysler. And every week, I would go and pick up 10 senior citizens and bring them to the temple, and they'd hold a meeting.
I remember going to school, being the only Jewish family in the school. I've had friends who grew up here who told me they experienced anti-Semitism. I have to say that I never did. My friends were mostly, at school, were pretty much all Mormon kids. And they were curious about Judaism. I never noticed any anti-Semitism.
The car stopped in front one time, and a woman came to the door and wanted to preach Christianity to me. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but I'm not interested because I'm Jewish. And she ran out to the car and she yelled to the child, come up quick, I want you to see what a Jew looks like. I kept busy.
She was secretary of Sisterhood for a while. She was secretary of
the Temple Board.
And she was secretary at the Federation for quite a while also.
I took shorthand, see. I had taken shorthand in high school. As a result, and especially, on the board, the Federation board, they were all men. I was the only woman. I was representing the women's division. And they decided I could be the secretary, especially since I took shorthand. So I still do. Richard says, my recipes aren't shorthand, please translate. Otherwise he can't. And I did all my own cooking, my own baking, and what else did we do? Everything. The kids all had music lessons. I don't know why, I really kept busy. And we didn't have TV because I figured if we had TV, it wasn't until Kennedy was killed that we got a TV. Before that, I said, no TV, you guys got to practice, and you got to do this, and you got to do that. You can read, do your homework, but no sitting and watching movies all day long.
We used to sit and listen to the radio instead, and read books.
Oh, and they got only classical music on the radio. They weren't permitted to listen to the jazz. I wanted them to appreciate the classical music, which I think they did. Yeah. They did learn to appreciate it.
Listen mostly to classical, but I like other things too. My mom thinks anything that isn't classical is jazz, and and that's how she refers to it. But I liked other things also.
Yeah, but
we used to go square dancing, so you could say that we like country and western to a certain extent.
George he was elected to the assembly up in Carson City, and so we were involved with it. And then at that time, the black people in the community were second-class citizens. They had to live in a specific area If they were on a bus, they had to sit in a specific area. If they went to the theater, they had a row in the back of the theater where they could sit, and they were really badly mistreated. And so George, we joined the NAACP and tried to raise money for them so that we could see what we could do to get it so that they were treated as people instead of as slaves. And when he was in the service, in the assembly, he tried to get legislation through saying that people are people and everybody should be treated equally. The black people now were just as free as the rest of us. And as a result, when he ran for re-election, he was not re-elected because of the fact that he was working so hard to help the black people.
I was on the last board of the Albert Einstein for the last year with my mom. We were both members of the Albert Einstein Hebrew Day School board. We'd had a kidnapping the year my daughter was in kindergarten off the school grounds. They never found the child. A big, massive hunt. And it kind of reflected on the school. It caused a real uproar. The following year, the first day of school, we had a bus accident that killed a child and injured 3 others. And it was so much bad news on the Albert Einstein that we totally reformed and redid everything and switched over and became the Hebrew Academy. My dad and I and Leonard Rosen and Dennis Sabbath, Arnie Rosenkrantz. We formed the board of the Hebrew Academy.
We came here in 1945 due to my mother's poor health. My father knew that the Western weather would be good for her, so that is really the motivation for our coming here. And he was headed to California, but somehow he landed in Las Vegas, bought a business, the Market on the corner of 2nd and Carson, and that's where our journey begins. I have to say, I've lived here 60-some years, and it's been fabulous. The Jewish community, there was none. There were I was trying to recollect how many families maybe there were, maybe 30 families, maybe 40 families, and there was no temple. There was nothing. And there was a need from all the people who lived here, there was a need of wanting to group together, to form a community. And a great deal of effort was put forth by all of these families, ours being one of them. The Saltzman family, my mother, Sarah, and Abe. But incidentally, those are 2 biblical good names, Sarah and Abe. Passover, I remember, was a big to-do. Everybody joined together and everybody participated. And we probably brought in a rabbi, I don't remember the name, maybe to conduct the services. Unfortunately, I had my first experience of getting drunk on Manischewitz wine. And it didn't determine my liking for Manischewitz, but that's beside the point. Las Vegas was a family. And I'm sorry to say it's not a family anymore. I'm very sorry to say it's not a family anymore. I think some of that closeness, some of that desire seem to have waned. People are putting themselves before the cause. I maintained that the integrity and the teachings have to come from the home. I always considered us a Jewish home, even though we did not really practice a lot of the traditions. But we were, and always will be, a Jewish family. And family is what it's all about. My mother was very, very aware of the love that a family should have for one another. And that's primo. A relative once came and he said, "Oh my goodness, Art," a relative of Art's, how can you raise your children in Las Vegas? I mean, there's nothing there. And I said, well, we're here, and we're teaching our children the values. And again, we're not very, I think we're very religious because our hearts are loving. We have Jewish hearts, all of us, our son Todd, our daughter Carrie, and Art and I. I believe that we have very Jewish homes. I love Las Vegas. I have always loved Las Vegas. I love what it has afforded me and my family. And I do resent people who bad rap us. I do not like the news media to bad rap us. I do not like the people who come here and just take without contributing back. Even though they give in their own communities, that's very nice, but they're living here now. And I do wish that our community would become more solid. There's a lot of different people and a lot of different feelings of how religious they want to be, Orthodox, Chabad, whatever. But I think that we should be a community first. I've been painting for I would say 40-ish years, but I'm also into the spiritual aspect of life. And when I had a need to express some feelings, this painting developed. And there's a certain sadness in the larger figure and somewhat sadness in the middle figure. And it comes to the point in our life that if we don't change what we don't like, it just keeps passing down from generation to generation. And thereby, we have to take hold of ourselves, evaluate, and see what we can improve, and then pass that on to our children.
The Jewish community was small, and they were housed in a little building. It was kind of a Jewish community center that served as the temple, too, and that was on Carson near 13th Street. And possibly the membership might have been 100 or maybe more. People who came didn't belong, people who participated, some Jews didn't, as it is everywhere. And we came here because we had the opportunity to have the leases on 3 of the theaters that were here. There are only 4 theaters. And so Lloyd took, I think it was about 27 years where he operated the Huntridge, the Fremont, and the Guild, which used to be the Palace. It was a pretty awful little theater, and he remodeled it. It became the fashionable Guild Theater. When he saw his young employees seating black people to one side in the theaters, and it was more than outrage, he just changed it. He said, people sit where they want. I remember he went to see the man who owned the 4th theater. He happened to be the mayor, and he would not change his policy. At the time when we moved here, the man who was president of the Jewish congregation was Jay Kozlov, who was CEO of the Frontier Hotel. And so a lot of Jewish business was discussed there, especially after 10 o'clock at night. We'd go for the buffet, and a lot of Jewish business was conducted there. Then after that, a lot of support came from the Sands Hotel. Jack and Trot and Carl Cohen were absolutely marvelous. I remember in the 6-Day War, they had a rally for everybody at that hotel. And I remember the priests and the nuns who were still wearing the long cassocks, everybody was there for us. And they were in the forefront of the civil rights fight. Very quietly, they were the ones who really broke up the blacklist. And very interesting experience that Lloyd and I had there. We were there one evening, and there were black people at the tables. And one of the men who had one of the concessions, I won't mention names, I don't think he's alive anyhow, sat down with Lloyd and me, and they said, Jack is making a terrible mistake letting the blacks play here. The Texans who fly their planes here won't come to the Sands. After a while, he got up and he left, and then Jack and Trotter sat down, and Lloyd told him what this man had said. You know what his answer was? We'll wait and see. Lloyd was at the behest of the ADL, in the early 60s, went to Washington. It's when I remember he met with Hubert Humphrey and worked on civil rights, and came back and lectured on civil rights, housing. I'm the only woman who got a Moulin Rouge award. I kind of followed in his footsteps. I did, in the 60s, I went to the school district, and I said I want to do get volunteers for education. And they gave me an office in the black neighborhood. And I felt very comfortable there, even when there were riots. And Mabel Hogarth, who was the first black teacher in the state of Nevada, used to look after me. Then when I did start Holocaust education, and we had our very first conference at the Frontier Hotel, and that was absolutely magnificent. I'd have teachers come up to me and say, Mrs. Katz, remember you helped me in the volunteer program. What can I do to help you? I went to Fred Lewis, who at the time was very important in the Hughes Corporation, and I told him what I wanted to do. I had been to Los Angeles, gone to conferences there, and now I wanted to do something here. And he listened to me and he said, I was in Army intelligence in the 50s. I went to Dachau. Hughes will do your conference. What? Well, it was the greatest. I had teachers from Los Angeles here. What did you do? Come to Los Angeles and do it for us. The community was open. And they did the most wonderful conference, and this is when I brought in survivors from Los Angeles, and it was for teachers. And when I walked into the hotel, it was thrilling. The marquee over the door said, welcome, teachers conference on teaching the Holocaust. You'd never seen that before here in this town, but several times. Big marquees advertised their Holocaust conferences. It's very hard to keep me still. I do have ideas. Well, for example, the conferences that we're doing again. Sheldon Adelson has invited us to do a conference at his hotel again, and he's been wonderful in the past. There must be at least 200 survivors living here. And they speak at the schools and various functions, and they look out for each other. They meet now every month at the Senior Lifeline next door to the library at the Federation Building. And they keep very, very active. And we keep planning every year to do what we do is in remembrance, and now there is a second generation, and one of them very, very active is on the council, and the university is observing something too. We've got a very good community, and everybody observes.
It's the Muriel Stevens Show, coming to you from America's most exciting city, Las Vegas.
I arrived July 8th, 1954. It was 108 in the shade. I had 2 little children. The apartment that my husband had told me he had fallen through, and I didn't have any idea where we were going to stay. I was here very reluctantly. He was a very interesting man, my husband. And since it was the time when women followed the lead with Whither Thou Goest, in the full sense of the word, I showed up after getting a postcard that said, Dear Muriel, by the time you receive this card, your home will be Las Vegas. And my only motivation in coming here was revenge. I would spend the rest of my life making his miserable for bringing me to this city, this desert, with nothing. My impression was of a city that had yet to happen. I couldn't look that far into the future. I was very young, and my only experience was a big city, inner city kid, where I had museums and public transportation and all of the things that make life so good. You know, concert halls and the Academy of Music and other things like that. None of them were here. Not a one. We had a library. No books. I got to know the librarian very well because every time I went to take out books, I realized they didn't have any. And so I ended up becoming very good friends with her because I kept giving her all my books. And that library today, well, it's not there anymore. I think they're going to do something else with it, but I don't know what else yet. My favorite memories of those days were Bruce going off with a bucket of water and a little Geiger counter that his father had bought him into the desert. We didn't know about desert boots. He put a lot of nails through his sneakers and was getting tetanus shots regularly. They didn't have 10-year tetanus shots in those days. And it was amazing. You didn't have to worry about your children. You didn't have to drag them anyplace. You didn't have to take them anyplace. There wasn't any place to take them. The social life really circulated around the temple, and that was where everybody saw everybody else. Some people lived right within walking distance. We weren't in walking distance, but my husband enjoyed the ritual of the synagogue, and so we spent time there. I wanted to finish my degree. I had never finished college because I married so young, and so I wanted to do that. And UNLV in those days was a one-room schoolhouse. The high school, Las Vegas High School, was larger than the university. Well, it wasn't a university. It was Southern Nevada, whatever. SNU wasn't a university. But you got to know everybody, and I enjoyed it a great deal, but it was not meant to be. Just as he moved me here without telling me, so he put me into radio. Radio came before television, and I did that show for 26 years. I had a retail store at the time. It was, well, none of this is there anymore. The Boulevard Mall was really a shopping center, a very small shopping center, and it had a lovely gourmet market in it. The Boulevard Market. And it had a bakery, and it had a cook shop, and it was mine. I have to tell you that life is full of ups and downs. And the ups are wonderful, and the downs are challenging, and you just have to go along with it. So this particular time, everybody was clamoring for a cookbook. I had 3 cookbooks going. One was on baking, one was on the recipes from the radio show, and one was just my recipes and my ideas and my own philosophy about cooking. This was a much smaller, much friendlier town in those days. It's still friendly, but it's getting harder and harder to really have that same kind of intimate relationship, even with those that are not really on your side. I had to mail order every food product that I wanted. I became, I can't tell you, I mail ordered just about everything in the world. I couldn't mail order bagels because they weren't doing that yet. But I learned that if a bagel cost $2 each, I would still buy them because I actually made them from scratch. And it took me almost a day and a half to complete them with the boiling water, the dough, the 2 risings, all of that. And what I got was a bagel, a sort of a bagel, because I had never baked a bagel before, and I wasn't sure that if I boiled them in water that they weren't going to just flop and become nothing. Well, they became something, but even though they weren't as tender, they were crusty all right, but not as tender as I wanted them. But I learned the value of a bagel. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but you learn the value of the little things that meant so much to you as part of your growing up that wasn't here. Nothing was here. Just us and the sagebrush and tumbleweed. Living in Las Vegas taught me many lessons, not the least of which was that if my husband had come home at some point in our lifetime after I was settled here and enjoying it, and he said, hurry up, pack your bags, we're moving to Tanganyika. Oh, okay. Wait a minute, I have to go to the library, I have to get every book on Tanganyika that was ever written. And I would go knowing that at first it would be very difficult, but sooner or later I would find the things that made me happy, and if I didn't find them, I would start them.
to Las Vegas in 1963 from New York City, with a year before that in Carson City. And when I came to Las Vegas, I was pregnant with my first child. I had no family or friends here and feeling very lonely. And within a couple of months, made a connection with Temple Beth Shalom, which became my family, a connection to the Jewish community and to Judaism, a lot of which I missed with my family connection at home.
I came in 1972 when my husband decided to retire, 1 year after the Northridge earthquake. Anytime the ground can move faster than you can, it's time to get out. So we came here to retire. At that time, there were 360,000 people in the whole valley. And again, Beth Shalom was the only synagogue in town, although I had a Reform Jewish background from Los Angeles. I came here as an activist from the San Fernando Valley, where Jewish women were actively involved in both secular and religious community.
When I came here, I couldn't find a place in the Democratic Party, so I joined the League of Women Voters, which was nonpartisan. And that really was an eye-opener for me because of the people I met and the entree to all the political people and the government in Clark County, which I was not aware of until you start studying them.
When I came in 1972, the League of Women Voters, Dorothy Eisenberg being the president, had sued
the school
district to integrate it.
Yes, I have the honor of having an elementary school named for me, and people said, well, how did you have that? And I said, well, I started by suing the school district because the schools were not integrated. And as president of the League of Women Voters, we decided that enough was enough, and we joined as an amicus in the suit with the NAACP. And it was a very stressful time, but a very historic time.
And in those days, this wasn't the homogenous community and the multi-ethnic community it is now. When I came in 72, I thought I had gone to the Deep South. I came into the valley, and the whole valley was Caucasian except for a pocket in West Las Vegas. Jewish women in particular, but Jews in general, were not very involved in secular and political life. So that we can sit around chatting and really remember the names of the Feigelmans, who were part of
the League, yes, and Shelley Berkley, who was active from the time she was a schoolgirl.
Right, and Myrna Williams and Eileen Brookman and Marvin Sedway from the Jewish community,
yes,
who were assembly members. And it's something that you all probably don't know, but back in 1864, there was a Rabbi Bein who was a member of the Nevada legislature.
And you were a member of the legislature.
And I was a member of the legislature.
Not that long ago.
Not that long ago, 1989. But the interesting thing was that I found in political life, contrary to what Dorothy found in the 60s, by the 70s, political life was fairly open in Nevada. They were welcoming people. And when I served in 89, then Governor Bob Miller and his wife Sandy had at the governor's mansion a Passover Seder.
I was involved with the sisterhood and was a sisterhood president, and also started, on the high holidays, started the children's activities centers. Up till then, the children would come to temple with us and didn't have activities of their own, and they would get a little bit disruly, and we had to go out with them out of services.
Our children, disruptive heavens.
I'm not yours, not mine, but in general. But I decided that we could have auxiliary services for the children, sort of a Sunday school type situation, and the Sunday school teachers came in and volunteered their time to work with the children in classes, and all of it was aimed at teaching about the holidays.
My daughter, who was one of those children, is now running the Mommy Tots program at Ner Tamid.
Yes.
And when we came, Beth Shalom was the only synagogue in town, and I had a Reform background, so I was one of the families that helped start the second synagogue in town, Ner Tamid. And it was both a wonderful and horrifying experience to form a synagogue. But it's been a wonderful success, and we've been happy there.
Our values are so involved with what happens
Yes.
In our communities and politically.
Yeah, when you think of the
equal
three of
rights,
us,
Of Jewish values.
you
yes.
think
Equal rights
Dorothy
and
and
education.
education and care for women and children and poor people and
Right.
Yeah.
while we were raising families, raising money
Right.
for good deeds.
Right. We do a lot behind the scenes.
Yes,
I think
and-
that's very important.
Well, a lot of it led up to at one point that I was president of the Federation here, the first woman who was president. And it was quite an education in that several of the men really didn't want me there.
Wow.
And which was not unusual in those days. And I really had to prove myself and do a lot better than anybody else. And most of that had to do with raising money. You can't expect people to give if you don't give the same amount or more, unless you're able to say that I feel enough about this cause that I'm giving money to. And so it's setting a standard. I really did find the Federation a growth thing for me in terms of running meetings, in terms of reaching out, not just to the Jewish community, but a lot of times we had problems with the school district, with every time there was a Jewish holiday, there were tests
Do you
scheduled.
remember?
Yes.
It is fun for us old friends to get together,
Yes.
to reminisce, and to remember some significant work we did.
My last 12 years, I've spent a lot of time at the state legislature.
Oh, I don't know what we would do without you there.
Representing women and children's
Yes,
issues
yes.
through the Nevada Women's Lobby. By the way, I've just retired from that.
No way.
I am not going to be
Oh,
the
my.
lobbyist any longer.
Oh, no.
As a paid lobbyist, I really learned a lot about the state. I loved it and helped continue so many of the programs that you fought
Yes,
for when you were
yes.
there. At the legislature, we have 2 days at the legislature and a training day before that, and bring women from all over the state. Women from Clark County said, we can't come up there too easily. Can't you do something like this in Clark County too? So in the off year now, we do have a women's conference. It's called the Nevada Women's Summit.
Right.
And there will be one in 2006. And we always bring in some great speakers from all over the United States and the state.
My bill on mandating that breast cancer mammography be covered and breast reconstruction after cancer, those are landmark bills for women and children.
Absolutely.
Plenty of lobbyists for the mining associates, for the banking, for the doctors, for the lawyers, but you rarely get organizations or women that will go up and advocate on behalf of the have-nots of the world. That's been my impression of the Jewish women particularly that I've worked with in both feminist and child support enforcement, that we are kind of interchangeable. I once said we could just lop off our heads and move the bodies around and we'd know who we were. And it's, for all of us, it's been a wonderful time. And most of us, I think, at different times have brought children with us.
Oh, yes.
To the events, to these things, so that now we have another generation.